Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hi, Malika here. Israel's war on Gaza has been one of the most documented genocides in history, live streamed to the world for over 2 years, with social media functioning as a rolling archive of images, videos, and testimony. But that archive isn't necessarily permanent. Today, we're revisiting an episode about the fight to preserve what remains, and what's at stake if the archive continues to disappear. This episode originally aired April 11th, 2025. All dates and references are from that time.
Today, evidence of Israel's war crimes in Gaza is disappearing faster than it can be archived.
I'm not sure that they're going to ever be able to finish the work that's going to get done because the sheer scale of attacks is constantly outpacing their human capacity to archive.
How much of the records we've seen of the genocide is already gone? I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take.
My name is Lila Hassan. I'm an independent investigative reporter, and I'm speaking to you today from Doha, Qatar.
And real quick, before we dive into the interview, I just wanted to know, how did you even come to this story?
It's one of those stories that sits in plain sight. And as I asked myself, like many other people who are constantly watching all of the footage that comes out on their phone, where is this getting saved? Who's saving it? What does saving it even look like? Who's in charge of archives? As the reporting process kind of unfolded, I discovered 1,001 challenges to that kind of effort.
To that question. Right. And so then you actually published an investigation for DropSite into this effort to document Gaza's war crimes. And
yeah.
I want to start with a photo that really struck me from this investigation that was recently published. And it's of Salman Hiji, who is a visual journalist in Gaza. And he's standing in front of the open trunk of, I'm assuming, his car with stacks of hard drives. There's tons of cables that are running out of it. It seems like there might be a generator in there. I mean, it's like this super rig that he has going on and this sort of dusty image. Tell us about this photo and about Salman.
Essentially, Salman Hiji, like many other journalists in Gaza, has been displaced multiple times. At the time we published, he had been displaced 7, but that's now changed since the essential end of the ceasefire. And so as he goes on the road from place to place, recording, taking photos, drone shots, and essentially covering what is now an accused genocide, he's taken alongside with him all of the equipment that he can to do this kind of high-tech work. He walks around with whatever he needs to be the best visual journalist that he could possibly be. And those hard drives that you mentioned, he's been carrying them throughout all 7 displacements since October 7th. He's kept some in private plots of land under the care of owners that might still be there. He hands them out. He hands copies of them out along the way to people. He's doing whatever he can to preserve them because they have the entirety of his reporting.
And why is Salman doing this? I mean, you've described that he's been displaced 7 times. He's also trying to survive as this war is happening. Why is he the one that's being tasked with trying to archive these crimes?
You know, it's something that he's tasked himself with. He cannot bear for the destruction of his homeland to also end up in the destruction of his material. He's been a visual journalist for over a decade now. This is nothing new to him, nor is this his first wartime in Gaza. Of course, this time stands out in that everything that he's once known has been leveled and completely destroyed. So he very much senses that he could die any moment, but he wants his work to live on. He's unique in that sense because he's thought of an archive system on the fly. You know, in addition to traveling with all of his hard drives, he's also creating dummy links of his Google account so that way it stays active. You know, many journalists like himself are subject to a lot of digital harassment, potential hacking efforts. And so he's constantly trying to come up with even digital systems to share with people so that way his work doesn't get lost.
So he is really an example of the depths that people on the ground are going to try and document the war crimes, or what he sees as the war crimes happening on the ground. And it's not just, we should say, not just to document the horrors of the war. That is a part of it. But there is also, again, this desire for accountability.
Yeah, well, right now we have two cases that are at an international level. The International Court of Justice is considering now that Israel may be committing genocide. That's a case that was brought by the South African delegation, and actually the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, one of the founder, is a party to that prosecuting party. And there's another case at the ICC, and that's for assessing whether or not Israeli officials as well as Hamas officials may have committed war crime and therefore constitute arrest warrants and, are still considering other crimes. So those are the current ongoing cases that give the Palestinians on the ground hope that they're going to be able to receive justice for the horrors that they've suffered. And the desire for accountability actually comes second to why they're doing this documentation work. They don't want this period of time to be forgotten. The cities and the area that they know have been leveled. They've been destroyed. The only thing that remains of their memory are the photos and the videos and the recordings and the documentation that they had prior to this war. Its actual destruction is what they've collected along the way. So at the very most, yes, they want accountability and they want justice. But actually, at the very least, they don't want what's happened to them to be forgotten. And that's why they're so committed to documenting on the ground. If you ask a couple of them, they just want the war to stop. That's their only ask right now, because they're unable to do any of this work or think of next steps until it's over.
Now, one of the things that makes what's happening in Gaza noteworthy and different is how we've been able to see in real time what's happening on the ground because of social media. So in your investigation, it's interesting, you found that despite this abundance of material that's been posted online on social media, a lot of this material is actually disappearing. How is the archiving different from, say, just posting on Instagram or Twitter?
Yeah, well, so something that was pointed out to me over the course of reporting that I think is something that I mention now in almost every conversation I have about this is that Instagram, Meta, X, and Telegram, any social media site are accidental archives, but there's really no requirement that they save this material and that they preserve it. In fact, they follow U.S. guidelines for terrorism designations, and they develop their own community guidelines as needed or as they determine to be necessary. And in many cases, a lot of the material and content to have come out of Gaza violates those community guidelines, either because it's accused to be associated with Hamas or because the material is so graphic, it's considered overly political, or it's considered unsafe for viewers. In some cases, it's even been wrong. So Mu'taz Aziza is one of the most famous incidents in which some of his material was retroactively taken down, and mangled parts of children's bodies was actually taken down because it was considered pornography or nudity. And that's obviously an incorrect designation. Part of this is because social media sites have automatic community guideline assessments, and it's not necessarily a person. But I was speaking with a few digital rights experts as well. Meta's recent move to remove all of its fact-checking team also means that there aren't going to be other people on the other end when people report a wrongly taken down post. But just to answer your question about why this material is disappearing, it's disappearing because there's no mandate to keep it up.
Lila, when we were talking about this story initially, I was thinking, and I think a lot of people will come to this story, especially our listeners and viewers, because we have been watching this. So there's so much material that it seems impossible that it would be wiped away, right? But, why is this digital material so fragile?
Yeah, well, the digital material is fragile because, one, social media might take it down, right? But two, even if you did download it, what's to say that it would still be functional 5 years from now? What systems update, technology systems update, our phones, our laptops change. It's incredibly important that material is constantly engaged with. But because of the sheer scale of material that's out there, we're not talking 1,000 posts or even 1 million, right? We're talking God knows how many a day since October 7th. If all of that material is not engaged with on the regular, there's something called bit rot, which is essentially when digital material degrades to the point where it's no longer usable. Part of the reason why verifying is also just as urgent as saving this material is because 10 years from now, AI might also be so good that we wouldn't be able to differentiate between the material of 2023, 2024, and what might come out then. So it's not just important that we save it. It's actually just as urgent that we verify it. And that's kind of what differentiates this war from other past conflicts, is there was the luxury of time, of being able to verify later. With Gaza, there really isn't.
Oh, that's, we think we post things online and that they're going to be there for time immemorial, and that's definitely not the case. So despite all of this material on social media that still does exist, that doesn't really translate to proof of war crimes, right?
No.
I mean,
yeah,
screenshots can't be entered as evidence, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what? A screenshot could, if you have another screenshot and and somebody that you've interviewed and a corroborative video, but it's never one incident that is going to constitute, an incident. And oftentimes it leads to other questions. There's one organization that's committed itself to collecting all of the material of Israeli soldiers that are filming themselves in homes that are destroyed with the possessions of Palestinians, setting off bombs or striking people. Even these themselves don't necessarily constitute war crimes unless they demonstrate some sort of systemic action. And you need to see that systemic action to demonstrate that it might be a crime against humanity, and that it's in a systematic way. So no one shred of digital evidence is going to be good enough to justify a war crime trial, but you're going to need a lot of it. You're going to need to scrape down everything that you've seen about it online, and you're going to need to find the witnesses that were there, right? Or the families of the victims, or the death reports, if there are any, or the ground reporting to demonstrate that it was a civilian area. It's never enough to have just digital evidence, but it is a starting point.
Mm-hmm. I mean, us viewers that we see this stuff online, we don't understand that the bar is actually much higher to prove evidence of say, a war crime. Can you walk us through, how raw footage or testimony becomes evidence for, say, the ICC, the International Criminal Court? What would be the end goal there?
Well, so there are a lot of Palestinian organizations that are already familiar with the requirements and the standards needed for material to be entered into international trials. Key among them is the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. They've actually been working with the ICC since Palestine became a member to the Rome Statute in 2015. And part of what they do is that they submit all of their material to local courts in Israel. And then when they prove that that's not going to be a productive route is when they're actually able to bring it to the ICC. They're based in Gaza, actually, and they had over a dozen researchers on the ground. Some of them have since been killed. And their office has been bombed as early as 1 week into the war, or 1 month into the war. They don't remember at this point because their makeshift offices have also been bombed. And when they've been able to find stations somewhere, there have been new displacement orders, and so their work has been very much disrupted. But before the war, they used to comprehensively document a variety of different crimes. So in Gaza, we're thinking about airstrikes, but actually there's also forced starvation. There's also the removal of medical care. There's the attack of medical workers. There's an entire series of crimes that are committed on the daily that they have committed researchers to speak with medics, with doctors, with community centers, with the cultural and the local know-how on how to reach these people and have comprehensive interviews with them to obtain from them whatever official documentation they've collected along the way, whether that's a makeshift death report or a birth certificate or the marking of a grave. But like I've mentioned, Sonia is one example of somebody getting displaced multiple times. They've all been displaced, and they're all under the risk of getting killed at any given moment. Mm-hmm. And because of the lack of internet and because of the lack of resources, really, when they were able to interview, let's say, 20 people a day, they're down to just one, because it takes so many hours to walk across destroyed roads to meet people, to go to the heart of an incident, to take those photos, and another couple of hours to walk back to where they had internet. And then sometimes they're not even able to work because they themselves need to eat, and they themselves haven't had a meal in a day or two. So, there's one, we can talk about what it actually looks like, but we can also talk about what it looks like on the ground right now.
More with Lila after the break. So, Lila, what responsibility does the rest of the world have to make sure then that these records don't disappear?
Well, right now, it's incredibly crucial that Palestinian journalists are protected because the evidence that we're talking about that would get admitted into an international court or that proves without question the existence of an incident or a war crime or events that have occurred require corroboration. They require corroborative evidence. So the people that are actually doing this work on the ground, first and foremost, need to be protected. And the reason I'm saying that is because I've spoken with a series of organizations that commit themselves to archives of all modern conflicts, many of them including Ukraine, Yemen, the Syrian war. Some of these organizations have done this work before. It's nothing new to them. What they're worried about actually is that they're going to endanger their colleagues on the ground by getting in touch with them because this kind of work is considered untouchable. Because there are so many allegations to terrorism, because there's so many false connections of journalists on the ground and other researchers on the ground to Hamas, and therefore kind of have this nefarious nature to them and makes them seem like legitimate targets. They're not. Within Israel itself, there are also laws that connect any material to Gaza as potentially incitement and violating national security laws. So anybody that's sharing this material or collaborating with these archive organizations actually might be committing crimes and are subject to arrest and deportations. There's actually been a score of arrests happening for that exact reason in Israel as well. So that's in one way their hindrance on being able to do this work. In another way is that they've told me that they haven't seen nearly as much international support for this conflict that they have for others. One organization told me it was clear as day to them that they did not receive the same funding and will not receive the same funding for this to document the airstrikes in this war that they've done in other wars. There's just not the same level of urgency. Mm-hmm. They've described their efforts in Ukraine as being thrown money at. In some instances, actually, a former U.S. State Department official told me that there used to be trainings for people in Syria on how to document this kind of work and how to send it to secure servers and get it out there. He had at one point intercepted the pilots' audio in Syria with the Bashar al-Assad regime and mentioning where they were about to strike next. He created a system to warn civilians to move out of those areas. And because he was collecting essentially evidence of war crime, he came up with a very extensive and strong system to store that material for it to then be used in international and local tribunals for war crimes. He went to the same governments that funded that effort in Syria. He said that he would be able to place IDF soldiers in the area, like the names of IDF soldiers and which battalions and which troops were there at the site of any given war crime. And he said that the government in the room, which he didn't want to name to me, went incredibly quiet. And he read essentially from this very awkward ending of a meeting that the answer was absolutely no way. So if there's no political alignment with the government, then they're not going to have support for this kind of archiving work.
As we're speaking, the ceasefire in Gaza has broken, and Israel has gone back to full-scale bombardment. Not only that, you have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who just flew to Hungary to meet with Prime Minister Viktor Orban, defying the international arrest warrant against him from the ICC for his alleged war crimes in the Gaza Strip. So, Lila, what do you foresee for the people of Gaza who are trying to document and archive what's happening to them?
I really hate to say it, but I do worry that all the sources that I've spoken for this story could die at any given moment. I check in with them every other day because I want to make sure that they're still alive. I'm not sure that they're going to ever be able to finish the work that's going to get done because the sheer scale of attacks is constantly outpacing their human capacity to archive. So truly, there's just not enough people, and there's not enough, they're human like you and I that aren't getting meals, that are not sleeping on beds, that don't have access to warmth and electricity as needed, and don't even have access to clean water. So if it's not the airstrikes that might kill them, it might be even the disease. It might be the daily lack of human need. I'm worried about their survival, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, with everything that we've seen unfold, you just wonder how much more can people endure.
Exactly.
And this is as they're trying to also document these horrors so that the world will not forget. As you have reported this story, this incredible investigation, what has been the most striking thing to you about the effort to archive Gaza?
What's striking to me is that we've already lost so much material. Researchers have told me that there's already an immeasurable amount that's been gone, that's been removed entirely from social media, well before people were able to capture it, well before people were able to save it. Even in that case, a screenshot would have helped. It's already gone. There have been entire accounts that have been removed. I spoke with a journalist here in Qatar who used to hold Instagram lives and broadcasts and share them. So it used to be very much live interaction with his audience on Instagram, who had tens and thousands of followers. That account was hacked and taken down. So all of that live material, all of those live broadcasts are completely gone. And mind you, the journalists have the best material on the ground because they've already spoken with witnesses. They've already gone to the scene of things. They've already offered witness accounts themselves for having been at the heart of the scene. So I'm very worried that people will not have the capacity, the willpower, the funding, and the protection to continue to do this work, or to do this work at a scale that's needed to capture everything that's happened in Gaza. And I'm worried that as you and I spoke, since this investigation has come out a month ago, and since we're speaking today, that already so much material has been removed and is already gone. So the most striking thing to me is that there's such an urgency. I think when we talk about archive, maybe we think about, and after the war is over, we'll be able to go back and, capture all that material and talk to all these people. No, because they're dying and because they're still getting killed. And because social media is the entire majority of the nature of the evidence that we're talking about, we could lose it before the war is already gone. So there's such an urgency. There's such an urgency to this kind of work that all researchers, and even myself as a journalist that used to work in human rights, I've never seen before.
Wow. Well, Lila, thank you so much for doing this investigation, for showing us all of the work that people like Salimane are doing, the important work that they're doing on the ground, putting themselves at great risk, and for coming to talk to us on The Take about it.
Thank you.
And that's The Take. We're always listening to what you think of the show. So let us know what kind of episodes you'd like to hear more of and what you thought of this one. And if you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist. While you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English.